She howled all night as her puppies lay in a well. What happened next broke me. I will never forget that night in Willow Ridge, Montana, the night a single howl tore through the rain so violently it yanked me out of bed like someone had reached into my chest and crushed my heart. And it wasn't the sound of barking, but the sound of crying. The desperate scream of a Doberman mother pushed to the last thread of life. When I opened the door, I saw something that still makes my blood burn every time I think about it. It was Raven, skin and bone, clawing at the ground with paws already split open and bleeding as her nails snapped, the blood washing into the rain and leaving faint red trails behind. She kept clawing, she kept digging, she kept howling. She thought if she stopped for even a second, her babies would die. I ran toward her boots, sinking into the mud, and only when I was close enough did I see the truth that froze me in place, because Raven wasn't digging at random. She was tearing at the mud around the mouth of an abandoned well, so deep and black it felt like it could swallow the soul of anyone who dared look down. Then I heard it, a small, thin, choking whimper, fighting its way through the storm, a sound on the edge of disappearing. Puppies. Tiny puppies. God forgive me, someone had thrown those babies into that damn hole. I stood there, paralyzed, my throat tightening as Raven turned to look at me, and her eyes, God, those weren't the eyes of a crazed dog, but the shattered eyes of a mother being torn apart from the inside, eyes that pleaded, eyes that said one thing without a single sound. Don't let my babies die, please. And in that moment, wrapped in the suffocating dark of that night, I knew someone in Willow Ridge owed the world an answer for this kind of filth, because this wasn't an accident, wasn't a mistake, but the deliberate choice of some heartless monster who had looked at newborn lives barely days old and decided to throw them into the cold, to starve, to freeze, to die slowly at the bottom of a well. Heat rose up my throat, anger, helplessness, a shiver that felt like it cut into bone. The rain kept hammering down as Raven howled like she was calling out to whatever soul might still be listening. I flicked on my flashlight and pointed it into the well where storm water was rising fast, and 3 small shadows were huddled together, trembling in broken intervals. One tried to lift its tiny head and let out a whimper so faint the wind could have stolen it away. I swear, I had never seen anything this cruel in my life. I shouted into the storm. Is anyone out there? Anyone. The puppies are still alive. No one answered. Only wind and rain and the sound of Raven clawing until her paws bled again. If you're watching this, please don't look away. You need to see what came next. You need to know what Raven and her babies went through. And if you believe cruelty like this deserves to be dragged into the light and condemned without mercy, hit subscribe so we can keep telling the stories that protect the ones who can't speak for themselves. I leaned over the well trying to see deeper, and Raven pressed against me, her whole body shaking as she stretched forward and howled a long, broken sound that felt like it shook all of Willow Ridge. Easy, Raven. I'm here, I whispered, even though my own hands were trembling. She placed her bloodied paw on my hand, a soft touch, but one that carried every ounce of hope she had left. And in that moment, I knew failure wasn't an option. If you believe no one, and I mean no one, has the right to do this to any living creature, leave a comment. Share this story so more people see the truth. That night, under the Montana rain, cold enough to bite through bone, I took a breath, tied a rope around the nearest tree, and said to Raven, I'm going down. I'm bringing your babies up. And then everything started to fall apart. The rain that night in Willow Ridge wasn't the kind of rain Montana usually knew. It wasn't just wet. It was cold in a way that felt like a warning dropped straight out of the sky. And as I stood at the edge of the well, soaked to the bone with my hand still trembling from the chaos in my chest, my mind drifted back to something painfully familiar. The feeling of being alone. I, Elena Whitford, 58 years old, had lived in this town for nearly half my life, tucked away in a wooden house at the far end of a dirt road, 10 minutes from the center, separated from engines and voices, and for many years separated from the world itself, after my husband died and silence became the companion I never asked for. Willow Ridge gets winters longer than promised, and rains that hit without warning like the way life takes the people you love most. I thought I had made peace with that emptiness, but tonight, watching Raven dig with paws so torn they were bleeding into the mud, I understood there are kinds of silence that should never exist, like the silence of the people who had heard her cries for 3 straight nights and still didn't step outside to see what was happening. And that silence hurt me more than her howling ever could. Windy Creek Road, the stretch behind the half-built houses, was already unsettling after dark, with no streetlights, no barking dogs, only half-finished roofs creaking under the wind and damp wooden beams moaning like something trapped inside. The empty lot where I stood used to be the backyard of a family who left years ago, and this abandoned well. It should have been filled long before now, but like everything else in Willow Ridge, "We'll get to it eventually" was the line everyone lived by. I lowered myself, shining the flashlight over Raven, and the rain darkened her fur until it clung to her thin frame so tightly I could count every rib, yet her eyes, those eyes still burned with the sharp, fierce light only a mother could hold. Some people would say, "It's just a dog." But no, Raven was a mother, and the love of a mother, human or animal, isn't something that bows easily to death. "I'm here now, Raven," I whispered. She turned, pressed her cheek into my hand a moment, so brief yet so clear, it told me she had been fighting alone far too long. I sat at the edge of the well, breathing in the smell of wet soil and rust and rain, a raw, metallic scent that made the whole place feel steeped in something terrible that had been happening for far too long. I angled the light again and saw the 3 tiny shapes curled at the bottom, trembling in jagged shivers, and I listened to the drip of water hitting the stone floor, 1 drop at a time, like it was counting down what little time they had left. The wind surged hard enough that I grabbed the rim of the well to steady myself, and Raven lunged forward with me, her head nearly plunging down if I hadn't pulled her back. She wasn't just afraid her pups would die, she was afraid that every second passing was another second she was failing the instinct that defined her. In the dim circle of my flashlight, I saw the torn skin on her front paws, deep red grooves smeared with mud, and I wondered how long she had been digging like this. 3 hours, 6. Or was it truly, as the neighbors claimed, 3 nights in a row? I lifted my eyes toward the mountains where black clouds stretched across the ridge like a heavy blanket pulled over Raven's despair. And I'm not one for dramatic declarations, but standing there in the Montana cold, with the wind howling, like it carried the cries of the puppies below, I felt like someone was testing the limits of my heart. No one on this earth should ever have to endure this, I said out loud, not sure if it was meant for Raven or for myself. I drew a long breath and forced my body upright because I was no longer 30, and my spine reminded me of that every day. But my heart was still the same, still unable to stand. Cruelty, injustice, or abandonment. What life had taken from me, I could never reclaim. But those 3 tiny lives down there, I could still do something. I scanned the unfinished houses, the broken fences, the scattered lumber. Willow Ridge was a town full of things left undone, including the hearts of the people who lived here. But tonight, I wasn't going to let anything stay unfinished. "All right, Raven," I murmured, placing a hand on her head. "I'm getting your babies out, I promise." She didn't understand my words, but she understood the tone, and she pressed herself against my leg like this was the first moment in days she'd let herself hope. Then I turned toward my car to grab the rope, and the rain slammed into my back, but beneath the cold wind sweeping across the lot I heard something new. Raven's bark no longer desperate, but sounding like she had finally handed me the trust she'd been clinging to since the first night. When I returned to the well with the rope in my hand, Raven was in the exact same place, leaning over the rim, her head slipping forward with every tremor running through her soaked body, and the rain kept pounding against her black fur until it turned her into a single dark shape, trembling in the storm while her paws still clawed, still dug, still tried to carve deeper into the earth as if she could pull the whole world up by herself if she had to. "Raven, stop. Let me look." I set the rope on the ground and approached slowly so I wouldn't startle her. But Raven was too strung out, too frantic to understand I was trying to help, and she turned toward me with a low growl, not to threaten me, but to warn me not to waste another second. I crouched down, flicked the flashlight on, and held her body with one arm so she wouldn't slip into the well as the pale beam slid down the moss-coated walls to the stagnant water below, and there they were, 3 tiny bodies huddled together, shivering with every cold ripple of rainwater rising around them. My heartbeat slammed in my ears like a hammer striking metal, and their faint whimpers stabbed into my chest one by one. They were alive. And if they were alive, every minute mattered. Raven suddenly let out a shriek, sharp enough that I flinched with my eyes closed, and she pressed her shoulder to my leg, ramming her head against my arm like she was saying, "Hurry, hurry, hurry. All right, I know, I know." I dropped to my knees, palms gripping the icy rim of the well, and part of me, the part that had lived 58 years in this town, wanted to call someone to wait for help, to follow every protocol the way I was taught. But the part of me that was a mother, the part of me that knew loss, understood one truth with brutal clarity. Waiting is the fastest way to lose everything. I lowered the rope and tested the length. It wasn't enough. The well was deeper than I'd thought, and I'd need something else to tie on, or another pair of hands to anchor me, but tonight it was only me and Raven. The wind howled harder, slamming through the half-built houses until boards clacked together like someone trying to choke back tears, and I shone the light down again, this time more carefully, just in time to see the water rising to the pups' bellies. The smallest one was already sinking into a thin layer of mud. My fingers dug into the stone. I could not let them go under. I couldn't. Just then, a crack split the earth beneath my boots, the rain-softened dirt beginning to slide, and Raven barked sharply, throwing her body into mine to shove me away from the edge. Easy. Easy, Raven. My breath stuttered, my heart racing, but I understood what she'd done. Even with her own babies dying below, she wouldn't let me fall. I looked at her, and the way she looked back through the rain held a plea so raw it felt like it was carved out of her bones, and anyone who claimed dogs didn't feel emotion had never seen eyes like these. "All right," I breathed. "I'll go down, but you have to let me do it." I looped the rope around myself, tying a double knot the way I used to when I was young, but my fingers slipped over and over from the cold, and every time I fumbled, Raven sank lower with a trembling whine, like she believed every lost second was another second her babies wouldn't survive. I wound the rope into a loop and dropped it down, watching the beam of my flashlight drift along the length. Then I leaned toward Raven, cupped her face in both hands, and whispered, "Raven, you've done everything you could. Now it's my turn." She touched her nose to my cheek, a gesture of absolute trust I didn't deserve, but she offered it without hesitation. I placed one foot on the stone rim, feeling the cold seep straight through the soles of my boots, and I tested my weight once steady enough. But just as I prepared to lower myself further, a sharper, louder cry shot up from the bottom of the well, a sound so urgent it felt like it clawed at my spine. I turned to Raven. She wasn't barking anymore. She was just watching as if I didn't go down she would jump herself. "All right," I whispered, "I'm going." And I eased my legs over the edge, sliding onto the rope, slow, deliberate breath by breath, while Raven stood right beside the well, panting hard, her eyes unblinking. I didn't know what waited for me at the bottom of that pit, what condition the pups were truly in, or whether I'd even be able to climb back out alone. But I knew one thing with a clarity that cut sharper than the cold. Tonight I will bring those babies up. Or I would not come back up at all. I had barely lowered myself 2 steps when the rope cinched hard around my waist, sending my body swinging dangerously in the open air, and the well walls were slick as oil, while the rain hit my face so directly I could see nothing but the endless black swallowing everything beneath me. But the tiny cries of the pups echoed upward, sharp, fragile, striking my chest with every beat. "Come on, Elena. Don't look down." I told myself that, and right then my foot slipped, sending a fist-sized rock crashing with me as it slammed against the wall and made Raven erupt into a terrified howl. "Raven, back up!" I shouted, but she did the opposite. She stepped closer to the rim, trembling all over while trying to keep me in sight, even though she looked like she might collapse. I gripped the rope tighter, my knees smashing into the stone so hard they sparked a wave of dizziness through me, and still I forced myself lower. When my flashlight finally reached the bottom, I saw the 3 tiny bodies curled together at the water's edge, eyes shut tight, their little frames shaking in brittle waves. All right, I'm here. I was almost at the bottom when I heard footsteps above, and then someone yelling, "Elena, what on earth are you doing, God Almighty?" I recognized Paul Hicks, my neighbor from a few houses down, and a second later, more light poured through the opening as 3 or 4 flashlights hit the mossy walls. Then Linda Hawkins' voice trembled through the wind. "It's her I told you, that dog's been barking for 3 nights straight." Raven barked toward them, not in warning, but in urgency and demand, pushing them to move faster. I shouted from the bottom, "There are 3 pups alive. I need more rope." Someone hold the line. Voices burst into chaos above me. Paul's frantic shout, rising through the storm. "Check my truck box. There's a tow rope in there." Footsteps pounded. Raven screamed. And the rain hammered Willow Ridge like it wanted to tear the whole town apart. I knelt in the icy water at the bottom, the cold soaking through my clothes and stabbing into my skin like needles, and I gathered all 3 pups against me, each no bigger than a hand, each so cold I couldn't tell if they could feel me at all. "It's okay. It's okay, little ones. I'm taking you up." I looked up, and right then the entire rim shuddered. A sheet of earth broke loose and fell, landing inches from me, and Raven unleashed a howl so piercing it silenced every voice above. It wasn't fear, it was an order. A mother telling the world, "Don't let them die." I yelled, "Drop the rope, now." Paul and Linda fed the rope down, but the rain made it heavy and slow, and I pressed the pups into my jacket, tying them against my chest. "Don't fall. Please don't fall." Above, Paul shouted, "I've got it, climb." I planted my feet against the wall and pushed upward, but every inch I gained slid back half a foot as mud peeled off in thick sheets, and Raven lay flat at the rim, her eyes glued to my every move like she was climbing with me. "Come on, Elena. Don't slip again," Linda screamed. I clenched my jaw and hauled myself up, my arms shaking like they were going to tear from their sockets, but I kept pulling, kept climbing, kept fighting the slide of mud. Raven paced the rim in frantic circles, whining, digging at the ground like she was trying to pull me toward her with sheer will. I was within reach of the top when my grip slipped again, and this time I felt myself falling. But I didn't fall. I felt the weight of 2 people yanking me upward, and Paul roared, "Hold her, don't let her go." I felt myself being dragged up in jolts, inch by inch, and Raven hovered right in front of me. Her front paws braced on the rim as if she would clamp her teeth around me and haul me out herself. At last, I rolled onto the ground, my whole body shaking violently as Paul pulled me back, and Linda grabbed my shoulders. "I'm fine," I gasped. "Get the pups first." Raven lunged into my arms the moment I unwrapped them. She cried a broken human-like sound that cracked straight through my chest. I looked at her, then at the 3 tiny quivering shapes clinging to life. "They're alive, Raven. They're alive, because you didn't give up." But when I lifted my head, headlights swept across the lot, animal control pulling in, And somewhere deep in my gut, I knew one thing with awful certainty: getting them out of the well didn't mean they were safe. When animal control pulled up, the amber lights on the roof flashed across the wet ground and turned the empty lot into a sheet of cold metal, and two people stepped out. A young man I'd never seen before, and a middle-aged woman with a face carved by a lifetime spent inside rooms filled with barking. "Are you the one who called?" the woman asked, her voice sharp like a crushed can. I nodded, still clutching the three pups against my chest while Raven pressed against my leg, her thin, trembling body shuddering with every breath. The young man, Riley, according to the tag on his chest, crouched first toward Raven, then toward the pups, and something shifted in his eyes at once, no longer the look of an employee following protocol, but the look of someone reminded of how fragile life really is. "Oh, God," Riley whispered. "They really made it." I nodded. They did. But they won't last long if we don't warm them. Riley opened the truck, grabbed towels, and moved toward me. But the second he brushed one pup with his fingertips, Raven growled and shoved herself against me as if she could hold off the whole world. "It's okay, Raven," I whispered, laying a hand on her head. "They're here to help." Riley stepped back half a pace. "She's a Doberman." "She's gentler than I expected. Dobermans only get mean when people treat them mean," I said, hearing a bitter edge in my own voice. The woman, someone called her Officer Dana, walked behind me, glanced at the well, then at Raven. 3 nights she was barking here. Linda nodded. No one bothered to check. We thought she was rabid. I felt Raven shrink against my leg at those words. God, she had fought alone. 3 nights, in the rain, in the cold. No food, no water, no help. Just because she had no voice, Riley turned to me. "We'll take them to the center, warm them, check them, feed them, assess everything." Raven whined softly. She knew what "take them to the center" meant. I held the pups tighter. "She's their mother. She won't leave them." Officer Dana crossed her arms. "We need to separate them, to examine them." Rules are rules. I felt Raven press her head harder into my leg, her breathing quickening with fear more than exhaustion. 3 nights. I said, my voice low but heavy as rock. "She kept them alive for 3 nights. If you take them from her now, she'll think she failed again." A long, heavy silence followed. Riley exhaled. "Fine. They stay together in the transport crate, at least until we get to the center." Raven touched her nose to my hand the second she heard that, like thanking me, and she followed shakily as I placed the pups into a clean-lined plastic crate. When I lifted her, she was so light it made my chest ache. She didn't resist. She only glanced into the crate and touched each pup once more before I closed the door. When their vehicle pulled toward town, I drove behind headlights cutting through the thinning rain, and Willow Ridge lay quiet and cold as if unaware of what had just happened at its heart. But inside my car, 4 small lives breathed weakly, but breathed, and one mother's heart fought to keep beating for them. The Willow Ridge shelter was a gray, concrete building with harsh white lights spilling through its windows like the sterile glow of a hospital, and when we stepped in, the smell of bleach and wet fur rushed over me, strong, sharp, sad. Raven stayed glued to my side like a shadow, flinching at every bark from the rows of kennels inside. She wasn't afraid of barking itself. She was afraid of barking that wasn't her baby's. Riley placed the crate onto a metal table. "You can set the mom up here." I lifted Raven, and when her body touched the cold surface, she collapsed from exhaustion. But the moment I opened the crate and brought the pups toward her, she forced her head up despite the tremors ripping through her. She licked each one, checked each breath. She shook, she panted, but she did it. I stood there with my palms on the table, rain still dripping from my hair, watching a scene that could silence anyone with a heart. "Raven," I whispered, "you did everything right." Riley paused and looked at me. "You know, people say animals don't understand love, But after seeing this, who could say that and mean it? I closed my eyes for a second. I believe one thing: a mother any species will fight to her last breath, and Raven had proved that in the rain and the cold, in the darkness of a deep well, and even here in this bright, sterile room. But I also knew something else: Raven's trials weren't over, and a heavy weight settled in my chest, like I already sensed what was coming. I didn't know why I stayed at the shelter until nearly midnight. Maybe because Raven wouldn't sleep if I stood more than 3 steps away from her. Maybe because the 3 pups were still breathing weakly, or maybe because in these past years I had lost too much, and I wasn't willing to lose anything else on a night like this. But when the wall clock hit 11:52, Officer Dana walked in with a sheet of paper in her hand, her footsteps as dry and blunt as a pen tapping a clipboard. "We need to separate the mother and pups for medical evaluation," she said. I shook my head immediately. No, not tonight. She's terrified. She's been through. Procedure is procedure, Ms. Whitford. Raven reacted to her voice instantly, staggering to her feet and placing herself between me and the crate, and even though her legs trembled so hard they nearly buckled, she widened her stance to protect her children. "You see," Dana said, "aggressive behavior. Aggressive is a mother protecting her babies. Aggressive." My chest heated like someone had set a match inside it. "I'm moving her to isolation," Dana added. "You can't come in with her." I looked to Riley for help, but he held my gaze only for a second, just long enough for me to understand he was helpless against procedure too. Raven turned her head toward me, and I had never seen eyes so desperate. I knelt, cupped her cheek. "It's okay, Raven. I'm right here. I'm not leaving you." But they dragged her anyway. Her nails scraped across the cement. Her breaths came in panicked bursts. Her whimpers broke in the back of her throat. The metal door slammed shut. The room shrank around me. The next morning, I returned before opening hours, the parking lot still wet, and the wind carrying the cold metallic smell of the night rain. And when I knocked, hoping to see Raven, I was met instead with a new notice taped to the counter. "Overcapacity clear space Friday." I thought I would be sick. "I need to see Raven." The young staffer shook his head. "No visits to isolation today. And the pups. They're stable. But we can't keep all 4 for long." "What does that mean?" He lowered his eyes. "We just follow directives. If no one takes them by Friday, we—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. My throat dried like dust. The well hadn't killed Raven and her pups, but the procedure might. I walked down the hallway, peering through each small window set in the steel doors. Raven wasn't there. I reached the end of the row where the metal door was thicker, the medical isolation room. "Open it," I said. "You're not authorized," the staffer replied. I stepped back to let him leave, then pressed my hand against the latch. Unlocked. I eased the door open and slipped inside. Raven lay curled in the corner, her leg wrapped in white bandages, an IV line taped to her paw, and when she saw me, God, her tail wagged once. She tried to stand but collapsed, so I knelt and placed my hand on her head. "Raven, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." She pressed her face into my palm, her whole body melting into the contact. I don't know how long I sat there, only that in that moment Raven stopped trembling. Her breathing steadied and she rested, truly rested for the first time since the well. And I realized something. This was the first ritual of healing, being seen, being touched, being believed. She wasn't being abandoned. If I walked away, she would lose that forever. On the 3rd day, I returned with a plan: find someplace else, someplace where a mother dog wasn't labeled over capacity. I called every shelter within 50 miles, then 80, then 100. No one would take them. Until a warm, steady voice from Evergreen Haven Rescue said, "If you can bring the mother and pups before the weekend, we'll hold a spot." the weekend, which meant we had one day. I rushed to the shelter. Riley stood outside with a cup of coffee. I found a place, I said. His face lit up, then dimmed. You'll need a transfer form. Dana won't sign it. Then you sign it. I can't. I'm just support staff. But, he looked at me for a long second, I can make sure the door isn't locked. We understood each other without another word. Inside, Raven stood the second she saw me, even though her legs shook so violently they barely held her up. The pups curled in their blanket, wheezing softly but alive. I opened the kennel. Raven stepped out, looked at me as if asking, "Are we really running?" Of course, we are, Raven. We're leaving right now. I lifted the pups and Raven glued herself to my heels so closely her nose brushed my ankles as we moved down the hall. The front desk attendant jumped up and shouted, "You can't remove them from..." I didn't stop, didn't turn, didn't wait. Raven stayed at my side until all 4 lives lay safely inside my car, and when I shut the door and turned to her, she lay her head on my hand and exhaled like it was the first breath she'd been allowed in days. I whispered, "Let's go, Raven. We're going home." And I drove straight toward Evergreen Haven Rescue, the only place left that believed abandoned lives still deserved a miracle. The 2-hour drive to Evergreen Haven Rescue felt longer than any road I'd taken in my life, and Raven lay curled in the passenger seat with her head resting on my hand the entire way, breathing softly but steadily, as the 3 pups slept on the thick blanket I'd spread out, each weighing less than a pound, yet warming the whole car with the fragile rise and fall of their tiny chests. When I turned onto the dirt road leading to the center, the sun had begun to slip over the eastern ridge, and the morning light filtered through the pines and washed the wooden steps of the old building in a soft, gentle glow that felt like a welcome. A woman stepped outside, middle-aged, kind-faced, steady in her posture, and she was the one who had answered my call the day before. "You must be Elena, yes." She looked at Raven, then at the 3 pups. "You brought them just in time." I opened the car door and Raven climbed down, shaking but no longer afraid, and she glanced at the woman and then at me, as if asking for permission. "Go on, Raven," I whispered. "This place is safe." The woman knelt, extended her hand, and Raven sniffed it gently before pressing her nose into her palm, a rare gesture for a dog that had endured so much hurt. She followed the woman into the warm wooden house, and I carried the pups behind her, stepping into a space scented with dried grass and soft soap, so peaceful it nearly made me cry. The woman laid a thick blanket on the floor, placed the pups close together, then switched on the infrared heater, and Raven immediately curled around them in a perfect protective circle only a mother could form. And for the first time since that night, Raven let out a long, deep breath. No trembling, no fear, no pain. A small sound rose, a faint cry from one of the pups, and Raven tilted her head and licked its tiny face, and I knelt beside her, placing my hand on her back, and she didn't flinch or turn. She simply allowed it, as if we had known each other far longer than a few days. "Will they be all right?" I asked. "You got them out of the well," the woman said. "That was the hard part. Let us handle the rest." I stood, and the morning light poured through the window, laying a warm, golden blanket over the 4 small lives, and something in my chest stitched itself back together, one quiet thread at a time. "Raven," I whispered, "you fought alone for 3 nights. Now it's time to let someone else fight for you." She blinked once, slow, warm, trusting. I left the room, though I left part of my heart behind on that blanket, where 4 lives slept in safety, and when I stepped outside, I breathed deep, letting the scent of young pine and the first light of day fill my lungs. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you. Stories like Raven's remind us that sometimes all a living being needs is a hand reaching out at the right moment, Leave a comment if this story touched your heart. Share it so more people can see how far kindness can go. And if you believe animals deserve protection, hit subscribe. Because we, through the small compassion we carry, are the only voice some lives will ever have.